Sixth, France, Paris. What is this Europe? Why are the black, the bronze, the yellow, the red inhabitants of Asia, Africa, and America bent low at the feet of the Europeans? Why are they the sole rulers of this Kali Yuga? To understand this Europe, one has to understand her through France, the fountainhead of everything that is highest in the West. The supreme power that rules the world is Europe, and of this Europe, the great center is Paris. Paris is the center of Western civilization. Here in Paris, matures and ripens every idea of Western ethics, manners, and customs, light or darkness, good or evil. This Paris is like a vast ocean, in which there is many a precious gem, coral, and pearl, and in which again there are sharks and other rapacious sea animals as well. Of Europe, the central field of work, the Karma Kshetra, is France, a picturesque country, neither very cold nor very warm, very fertile, weather neither excessively wet nor extremely dry, sky clear, sun sweet, elms and oaks in abundance, grasslands charming, hills and rivers small, springs delightful. Excepting some parts of China, no other country in the world have I seen that is so beautiful as France. That play of beauty in water and fascination in land, that madness in the air, that ecstasy in the sky. Nature so lovely, the men so fond of beauty. The rich and the poor, the young and the old, keep their houses, their rooms, the streets, the fields, the gardens, the walks, so artistically neat and clean. The whole country looks like a picture. Such love of nature and art have I seen nowhere else except in Japan. The palatial structures, the gardens resembling Indra's paradise, the groves, even the farmers' fields, everywhere and in everything there is an attempt at beauty, an attempt at art, remarkable and effected with success too. From ancient times, France has been the scene of conflict among the Gauls, the Romans, the Franks, and other nations. After the destruction of the Roman Empire, the Franks obtained absolute dominion over Europe. Their king, Charlemagne, forced Christianity into Europe by the power of the sword. Europe was made known in Asia by these Franks. Hence, we still call the Europeans Franki, Ferengi, Planki, or Filinga, and so on. Ancient Greece, the fountainhead of Western civilization, sank into oblivion from the pinnacle of her glory. The vast empire of Rome was broken into pieces by the dashing waves of the barbarian invaders. The light of Europe went out. It was at this time that another barbarous race rose out of obscurity in Asia, the Arabs. With extraordinary rapidity, that Arab tide began to spread over the different parts of the world. Powerful Persia had to kiss the ground before the Arabs and adopt the Mohammedan religion, with the result that the Muslim religion took quite a new shape. The religion of the Arabs and the civilization of Persia became intermingled. With the sword of the Arabs, the Persian civilization began to disseminate in all directions. That Persian civilization had been borrowed from ancient Greece and India. From the east and from the west, the waves of Muslim invaders dashed violently on Europe, and along them also the light of wisdom and civilization began dispersing the darkness of blind and barbarous Europe. The wisdom, learning, and arts of ancient Greece entered into Italy, overpowered the barbarians, and with their quickening impulse, life began to pulsate in the dead body of the world capital of Rome. The pulsation of this new life took a strong and formidable shape in the city of Florence. Old Italy began showing signs of new life. This is called Renaissance, the new birth. But this new birth was for Italy only a rebirth, while for the rest of Europe it was the first birth. Europe was born in the 16th century AD, that is about the time when Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and other Mughal emperors firmly established their mighty empire in India. Italy was an old nation. At the call of the Renaissance, she woke up and gave her response, but only to turn over on her side in bed, as it were, and fall fast asleep again. For various reasons, India also stirred up a little at this time. For 3 ruling generations from Akbar, learning, wisdom, and arts came to be much esteemed in India. But India was also a very old nation, and for some reason or other, she also did the same as Italy and slept on again. In Europe, the tide of revival in Italy struck the powerful, young, and new nation, the Franks. The torrent of civilization, flowing from all quarters to Florence and there uniting, assumed a new form. But Italy had not the power within herself to hold that stupendous mass of fresh energy. The revival would have, as in India, ended there, had it not been for the good fortune of Europe that the new nation of the Franks gladly took up that energy, and they, in vigor of their youthful blood, boldly floated their national ship on the tide. And the current of that progress gradually gathered in volume and strength. From one it swelled into 1,000 courses. The other nations of Europe greedily took the water of that tide into their own countries by cutting new channels, and increased its volume and speed by pouring their own lifeblood into it. That tidal wave broke in the fullness of time on the shores of India. It reached as far as the coast of Japan, and she became revitalized by bathing in its water. Japan is the new nation of Asia. Paris is the fountainhead of European civilization, as Gomukhi is of the Ganga. This huge metropolis is a vision of heaven on earth, the city of constant rejoicing. Such luxury, such enjoyments, such mirthfulness are neither in London, nor in Berlin, nor anywhere else. True, there is wealth in London and in New York. In Berlin, there is learning and wisdom. But nowhere is that French soil, and above all, nowhere is that genius of the Frenchman. Let there be wealth in plenty. Let there be learning and wisdom. Let there be beauty of nature also, elsewhere. But where is the man? This remarkable French character is the incarnation of the ancient Greek, as it were, that had died to be born again. Always joyful, always full of enthusiasm, very light and silly, yet again exceedingly grave, prompt and resolute to do every work, and again despondent at the least resistance. But that despondency is only for a moment with the Frenchman, his face soon after glowing again with fresh hope and trust. The Paris University is the model of European universities. All the academies of science that are in the world are imitations of the French Academy. Paris is the first teacher of the founding of colonial empires. The terms used in military art in all languages are still mostly French. The style and diction of French writings are copied in all the European languages. Of science, philosophy, and art, this Paris is the mine. Everywhere in every respect, there is imitation of the French, as if the French were the townspeople, and the other nations only villagers compared with them. What the French initiate, the Germans, the English, and other nations imitate, maybe 50 or 25 years later, whether it be in learning, or in art, or in social matters. This French civilization reached Scotland, and when the Scottish king became the King of England, it awoke and roused England. It was during the reign of the Stuart dynasty of Scotland that the Royal Society and other institutions were established in England. Again, France is the home of liberty. From here, the city of Paris travelled with tremendous energy the power of the people, and shook the very foundations of Europe. From that time, the face of Europe has completely changed, and a new Europe has coalesced into existence. Liberté, equalite, fraternité is no more heard in France. She is now pursuing other ideas and other purposes, while the spirit of the French Revolution is still working among the other nations of Europe. One distinguished scientist of England told me the other day that Paris was the center of the world, and that the more a nation would succeed in establishing its connection with the city of Paris, the more would that nation's progress in national life be achieved. Though such assertion is a partial exaggeration of fact, yet it is certainly true that if anyone has to give to the world any new idea, this Paris is the place for its dissemination. If one can gain the approbation of the citizens of Paris, that voice the whole of Europe is sure to echo back. The sculptor, the painter, the musician, the dancer, or any artist, if he can first obtain celebrate in Paris, acquires very easily the esteem and eulogy of other countries. We hear only of the darker side of this Paris in our country, that it is a horrible place, a hell on earth. Some of the English hold this view, and the wealthy people of other countries, in whose eyes no other enjoyment is possible in life except the gratification of the senses, naturally see Paris as the home of immorality and enjoyments. But it is the same in all big cities of the West, such as London, Berlin, Vienna, New York. The only difference is, in other countries the means of enjoyment are commonplace and vulgar, but the very dirt of civilized Paris is coated over with gold leaf. To compare the refined enjoyments of Paris with the barbarity, in this respect, of other cities is to compare the wild boar's wallowing in the mire with the peacock's dance spreading out its feathers like a fan. What nation in the world has not the longing to enjoy and live a life of pleasure? Otherwise, why should those who get rich hasten to Paris of all places? Why do kings and emperors, assuming other names, come to Paris and live incognito and feel themselves happy by bathing in this whirlpool of sense enjoyment? The longing is in all countries, and no pains are spared to satisfy it. The only difference is the French have perfected it as a science. They know how to enjoy. They have risen to the highest rung of the ladder of enjoyment. Even then, most of the vulgar dances and amusements are for the foreigner. The French people are very cautious. They never waste money for nothing. All those luxuries, those expensive hotels and cafes, at which the cost of a dinner is enough to ruin one, are for the rich, foolish foreigner. The French are highly refined, profuse in etiquette, polished and suave in their manners, clever in drawing money from one's pocket, and when they do, they laugh in their sleeve. Besides, there is another thing to note. Society, as it is among the Americans, Germans, and the English, is open to all nations, so the foreigner can quickly see the ins and outs of it. After an acquaintance of a few days, the American will invite one to live in his house for a while. The Germans also do the same, and the English do so after a longer acquaintance. But it is very different with the French. A Frenchman will never invite one to live with his family unless he is very intimately acquainted with him. But when a foreigner gets such an opportunity and has occasion and time enough to see and know the family, he forms quite a different opinion from what he generally hears. Is it not equally foolish of foreigners to venture an opinion on our national character, as they do, by seeing only the low quarters of Calcutta? So with Paris. The unmarried women in France are as well guarded as in our country. They cannot even mix flatly in society. Only after marriage can they do so in company with their husbands. Like us, their negotiations for marriage are carried on by their parents. Being a jolly people, none of their big social functions will be complete without professional dancers. As with us, performances of dancing girls are given on the occasions of marriage and puja. Living in a dark, foggy country, the English are gloomy, make long faces, and remark that such dances at one's home are very improper, but at a theatre they are all right. It should be noted here that their dances may appear improper to our eyes, but not so with them, they being accustomed to them. The girl may at a dance appear in a dress showing the neck and shoulders, and that is not taken as improper, and the English and Americans would not object to attending such dances, but on going home might not refrain from condemning the French customs. Again, the idea is the same everywhere regarding the chastity of women, whose deviation from it is fraught with danger. But in the case of men, it does not matter so much. The Frenchman is no doubt a little freer in this respect, and like the rich men of other countries, cares not for criticism. Generally speaking, in Europe, the majority of men do not regard a little lax conduct as so very bad, and in the West, the same is the case with bachelors. The parents of young students consider it rather a drawback if the latter fight shy of women, lest they become effeminate. The one excellence which a man must have in the West is courage. Their word virtue and our word viratva, heroism, are one and the same. Look to the derivation of the word virtue and see what they call goodness in man. For women, they hold chastity as the most important virtue, no doubt. One man marrying more than one wife is not so injurious to society as a woman having more than one husband at the same time, for the latter leads to the gradual decay of the race. Therefore, in all countries, good care is taken to preserve the chastity of women. Behind this attempt of every society to preserve the chastity of women is seen the hand of nature. The tendency of nature is to multiply the population, and the chastity of women helps that tendency. Therefore, in being more anxious about the purity of women than of men, every society is only assisting nature in the fulfillment of her purpose. The object of my speaking of these things is to impress upon you the fact that the life of each nation has a moral purpose of its own, and the manners and customs of a nation must be judged from the standpoint of that purpose. The Westerners should be seen through their eyes, to see them through our eyes, and for them to see us with theirs. Both these are mistakes. The purpose of our life is quite the opposite of theirs. The Sanskrit name for a student, brahmacharin, is synonymous with the Sanskrit word kamajit. Our goal of life is moksha. How can that be ever attained without brahmacharya or absolute continence? Hence it is imposed upon our boys and youth as an indispensable condition during their studentship. The purpose of life in the West is bhoga, enjoyment. Hence much attention to strict brahmacharya is not so indispensably necessary with them as it is with us. Now to return to Paris. There is no city in the world that can compare with modern Paris. Formerly, it was quite different from what it is now. It was somewhat like the Bengali quarters of Varanasi, with zigzag lanes and streets, two houses joined together by an arch over the lane here and there, wells by the side of walls, and so on. In the last exhibition, they showed a model of old Paris, but that Paris has completely disappeared by gradual changes. The warfare and revolutions through which the city has passed have each time caused ravages in one part or another, razing everything to the ground, and again, new Paris has risen in its place, cleaner and more extensive. Modern Paris is, to a great extent, the creation of Napoleon III. He completed that material transformation of the city which had already been begun at the fall of the ancient monarchy. The student of the history of France need not be reminded how its people were oppressed by the absolute monarchs of France prior to the French Revolution. Napoleon III caused himself to be proclaimed emperor by sheer force of arms, wading through blood. Since the first French Revolution, the French people were always fickle and thus a source of alarm to the empire. Hence, the emperor, in order to keep his subjects contented and to please the ever unstable masses of Paris by giving them work, went on continually making new and magnificent public roads and embankments and building gateways, theatres, and many other architectural structures, leaving the monuments of old Paris as before. Not only was the city traversed in all directions by new thoroughfares, straight and wide, with sumptuous houses raised or restored, but a line of fortification was built doubling the area of the city. Thus arose the boulevards and the fine quarters of D'Antin and other neighborhoods, and the avenue of the Champs-Élysées, which is unique in the world, was reconstructed. This avenue is so broad that down the middle and on both sides of it run gardens all along, and in one place it has taken a circular shape which comprises the city front, towards the west, called Place de la Concorde. Round this Place de la Concorde are statues in the form of women representing the 8 chief towns of France. One of these statues represents the district of Strasbourg. This district was wrested from the hands of the French by the Germans after the Battle of 1870. The pain of this loss the French have not yet been able to get over, and that statue is still covered with flowers and garlands offered in memory of its dead spirit, as it were. As men place garlands over the tombs of their dead relations, so garlands are placed on that statue at one time or another. It seems to me that the Chandni Chowk of Delhi might have been at one time somewhat like this Place de la Concorde. Here and there columns of victory, triumphal arches and sculptural art in the form of huge statues of men and women, lions, etc. adorn the square. The very big triumphal column in imitation of Trajan's column, made of gunmetal procured by melting 1,200 guns, is erected in Place Vendôme in memory of the great hero Napoleon I. On the sides are engraved the victories of his reign, and on the top is the figure of Napoleon Bonaparte. In the Place de la Bastille stands the Column of July in memory of the Revolution of July 1789, on the side of the old fortress, the Bastille afterwards used as a state prison. Here were imprisoned those who incurred the king's displeasure. In those old days, without any trial or anything of the kind, the king would issue a warrant bearing the royal seal, called lettre de cachet. Then, without any inquiry as to what good acts the victim had done for his country, or whether he was really guilty or not, without even any question as to what he actually did to incur the king's wrath, he would be at once thrown into the Bastille. If the fair favourites of the kings were displeased with anyone, they could obtain by request lettre de cachet from the king against that man, and the poor man would at once be sent to the Bastille. Of the unfortunate who were imprisoned there, very few ever came out. When afterwards the whole country rose as one man in revolt against such oppression and tyranny, and raised the cry of individual liberty, all are equal, no one is high or low, the people of Paris in their mad excitement attacked the king and queen. The very first thing the mob did was to pull down the Bastille, the symbol of extreme tyranny of man over man, and passed the night in dancing, singing, and feasting on the spot. The king tried to escape, but the people managed to catch him, and hearing that the father-in-law of the king, the Emperor of Austria, was sending soldiers to aid his son-in-law, became blind with rage and killed the king and the queen. The whole French nation became mad in the name of liberty and equality. France became a republic. They killed all the nobility whom they could get hold of, and many of the nobility gave up their titles and rank and made common cause with the subject people. Not only so, they called all the nations of the world to rise. Awake! Kill the kings who are all tyrants. Let all be free and have equal rights. Then all the kings of Europe began to tremble in fear, lest this fire might spread into their countries, lest it might burn their thrones, and hence, determined to put it down, they attacked France from all directions. On the other side, the leaders of the French Republic proclaimed, "Our native land is in peril. Come one and all." And the proclamation soon spread like the flames of a conflagration throughout the length and breadth of France. The young, the old, the men, the women, the rich, the poor, the high, the low, singing their martial song, La Marseillaise, the inspiring national song of France, came out. Crowds of the poor French people, in rags, barefooted, in that severe cold, and half-starved, came out with guns on their shoulders, Paritranaya, Vinashaya cha Dushkritam, for the destruction of the wicked and the salvation of their homes, and boldly faced the vast united force of Europe. The whole of Europe could not stand the onrush of that French army. At the head and front of the French army stood a hero at the movement of whose finger the whole world trembled. He was Napoleon. With the edge of the sword and at the point of the bayonet, he thrust liberty, equality, and fraternity into the very bone and marrow of Europe, and thus the victory of tricolored cockade was achieved. Later, Napoleon became the Emperor of France and successfully accomplished the consolidation of the French Empire. Subsequently, not being favored with an heir to the throne, he divorced the partner of his life in weal and woe, the guiding angel of his good fortune, the Empress Josephine, and married the daughter of the Emperor of Austria. But the wheel of his luck turned with his desertion of Josephine. His army died in the snow and ice during his expedition against Russia. Europe, getting this opportunity, forced him to abdicate his throne, sent him as an exile to an island, and put on the throne one of the old royal dynasty. The wounded lion escaped from the island and presented himself again in France. The whole of France welcomed him and rallied under his banner, and the reigning king fled. But this luck was broken once for all, and it never returned. Again, the whole of Europe united against him and defeated him at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon boarded an English man of war and surrendered himself. The English exiled him and kept him as a lifelong prisoner in the distant island of St. Helena. Again, a member of the old royal family of France was reinstated as king. Later on, the French people became restless under the old monarchy, rose in rebellion, drove away the king and his family, and re-established the republic. In course of time, a nephew of the great Napoleon became a favorite with the people, and by means of intrigues, he proclaimed himself emperor. He was Napoleon III. For some time his reign was very powerful, but being defeated in conflict with the Germans, he lost his throne, and France became once more a republic, and since then down to the present day, she has continued to be republican.